There's a pattern in history that has destroyed 3 global superpowers in the last 500 years. And right now, in 2025, the United States is following that exact same pattern, stage by stage, decision by decision, almost like we're reading from the same script that led to catastrophe every single time before. You need to understand that this isn't just a theory about what might happen in the future. This is a historical autopsy of what has already happened to the greatest empires the world has ever seen. In 1590, Spain was the richest empire on earth. They controlled half the world's gold and silver. Their military dominated Europe. And their currency was accepted everywhere. Yet within 80 years, they were bankrupt, a second-rate power that never recovered. In 1914, Britain ruled the largest empire in human history. The sun never set on British territory, and the pound sterling was the global reserve currency. Yet within 40 years, the empire was gone, the currency collapsed, and they became America's junior partner. In 1991, the Soviet Union was the other superpower, possessing nuclear weapons, global influence, and satellites spanning the globe. But it ceased to exist in just 900 days, not from war, but from economic implosion. 3 times, 3 superpowers, 3 complete collapses, all following the exact same sequence. And here is what should terrify you. The United States has already completed 5 of the 7 stages. We are not approaching the pattern, we are deep inside it. This is the story of how empires die, why they always think they're different, and why the math says we are next. And it is happening faster than anyone wants to admit. Before we walk through the specific stages we are in right now, you need to understand what imperial collapse actually looks like in practice. Not in textbooks, but in the real world when a superpower dies. Imperial collapse doesn't start with invasion or military defeat. It starts with economic exhaustion. The empire extends beyond its ability to maintain itself, establishing military bases in 150 countries, fighting wars on multiple fronts, making promises it cannot keep, and accumulating debt that it cannot repay. At first, the decline is invisible because the currency still works, the military still wins battles, and the government still makes promises. But beneath the surface, the foundation is cracking. Resources are misallocated, productive capacity shrinks, and the best and brightest leave. Then comes the acceleration, where allies start hedging, enemies test boundaries, trade partners seek alternatives, and the reserve currency status erodes. Suddenly, the advantages that made you powerful become vulnerabilities. Your currency, once demanded by everyone, comes flooding back home. Your military spread across the world becomes unsustainable, and your promises, once guaranteed by strength, become empty words. That is not theoretical. That is exactly what happened to Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. And it happened because they made exactly the same decisions we are making now. They believed their power was permanent, they overextended militarily, they debased their currency, and they refused to accept reality until the collapse was already underway. Let's look at how it actually happened, starting with the first global empire, Spain, from the 1500s to the 1600s, because this is the original blueprint. After Columbus discovered the Americas in 1492, Spain became the first true world power, conquering the Aztec and Inca empires and seizing control of the richest gold and silver mines ever discovered. By 1550, Spanish galleons were bringing home 200 tons of silver per year, and by 1600, that number had risen to over 400 tons annually. Spain controlled the money supply of Europe, the Spanish real was the global reserve currency, and everyone wanted Spanish silver. This is where the pattern begins, with a country that controls the money of the world and believes that makes them invincible. King Philip, ruling from 1556 to 1598, had more money than any monarch in history, and he spent it on empire. This leads to stage 1, military overextension. Spain fought wars everywhere simultaneously, against the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean, against France and Italy, against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, and against England's navy, alongside wars in the Philippines and wars in the Americas. By 1580, Spain had military commitments on 4 continents, and the cost was staggering, with half of Spain's revenue going to the military, and still, it wasn't enough. This forced them into stage 2, currency debasement. The Spanish crown couldn't pay its bills with taxes alone, so they did what every failing empire does. They debased the currency. They started mixing copper into silver coins, so a coin that was supposed to be pure silver became 50% copper, then 75% copper. The face value stayed the same, but the real value plummeted, and by 1600, Spanish silver coins contained barely any silver, leading merchants to stop accepting them at face value while inflation exploded. Then came stage 3, the debt spiral. Spain borrowed constantly from Italian bankers, from German bankers, and from anyone who would lend. By 1557, less than 20 years into Philip's reign, Spain declared bankruptcy. They defaulted on their debts, restructured, and kept borrowing, only to declare bankruptcy again in 1560, again in 1575, and again in 1596. That is 4 bankruptcies in 40 years, and each time they promised reforms, yet each time they went right back to borrowing and spending. This led directly to stage 4, loss of productive capacity. Here is what people don't understand about Spain's collapse. They had all the gold and silver in the world, and it destroyed them because when you have unlimited money, you stop producing. Why grow food when you can import it? Why build ships when you can buy them? And why innovate when you can just spend? Spanish nobility considered work beneath them, so manufacturing declined, agriculture stagnated, and all the wealth flowed to importing goods from other countries. The gold and silver that came from the Americas went straight back out to pay for French wine, Italian silk, and Dutch goods. Spain became a conduit where wealth flowed through them, but none of it stayed. By 1600, Spain was producing almost nothing, entirely dependent on imports and entirely dependent on silver to pay for everything. So when the silver mines began to deplete and production dropped, the entire system collapsed. This triggered stage 5, social decay. With the economy failing, crime exploded, beggars filled the streets of Madrid, productive citizens emigrated, and the best minds left for France, England, and the Netherlands, countries that were building, creating, and growing. Spain was left with bureaucrats, soldiers, and priests, with no one creating wealth and everyone consuming it. By 1640, Spain lost Portugal. By 1650, they lost the Netherlands, their richest territory. And by 1700, the Spanish Empire was a shell, still large on paper, but economically dead. They went from the world superpower to a secondary power in less than a century and never recovered. Spain today is a regional European country, pleasant and cultured, but irrelevant on the world stage, a tourist destination for the descendants of the conquistadors. That is what imperial collapse looks like. Now let's jump forward 300 years to Britain in the 1900s, the empire where the sun never set. At its peak, Britain controlled 25% of the world's land surface and 400 million subjects. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. Every major trade contract was denominated in pounds. Every central bank held British bonds. And London was the financial center of the world. Just like Spain 300 years earlier, they believed it was permanent, but they were already following the pattern. Stage 1 was military overextension. By 1900, Britain had military commitments everywhere: India, Africa, the Middle East, China, the Pacific, and the Caribbean. They had to defend territory on 6 continents, and the cost was enormous. When World War I started in 1914, Britain faced a choice: stay neutral and let Europe destroy itself, or jump in and bankrupt the empire to win. They chose to fight. World War I cost Britain over $40 billion, which is $1 trillion in today's money. They borrowed from everyone, mostly from the United States, and by 1918, Britain owed America billions. The creditor had become the debtor. They had won the war and kept the empire, so they thought they could rebuild, but they were wrong. This led to Stage 2, currency debasement. The pound sterling was supposed to be backed by gold, but the war had drained Britain's gold reserves because they had shipped gold to America to pay for weapons, food, and supplies. By 1920, Britain's gold reserves were half what they had been in 1914, but they tried to maintain the pound's value anyway. They went back on the gold standard at the pre-war rate in 1925, but the problem was that the pound was overvalued. British exports became too expensive, manufacturing declined, unemployment rose, and the government had to keep interest rates high to defend the currency, which destroyed the domestic economy. By 1931, they couldn't hold it anymore, and Britain abandoned the gold standard. The pound lost 25% of its value overnight. The global reserve currency had just admitted it couldn't keep its promises. Stage 3 was the debt spiral. Britain never recovered from World War I debt. And then World War II started, costing another $120 billion and requiring more borrowing from America. By 1945, Britain owed the United States and Canada over $30 billion, more than Britain's entire GDP. The war was won, but the empire was finished because they couldn't defend it, couldn't afford it, and couldn't maintain it. This was Stage 4, loss of empire. In 1947, Britain gave up India, the crown jewel and the source of wealth for 200 years. Gone. Over the next 20 years, they lost everything: Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. By 1970, the British Empire existed only in history books. Finally, Stage 5, currency collapse. The pound kept falling. In 1940, £1 equaled $4 or $3. By 1950, it was $2.80. By 1970, it was $2.40. By 1980, it was $2.30. And today, £1 is $1.27. The global reserve currency became a regional currency. Britain tried to maintain the pretense with a permanent seat on the UN Security Council nuclear weapons and a special relationship with America. But everyone knew the truth. They were a former power, a museum of what used to be great. The empire was gone, and it never came back. Now let's look at the most recent example, the Soviet Union from 1945 to 1991. After World War II, the USSR emerged as a superpower with nuclear weapons, massive military control over Eastern Europe, and satellites in space. They believed they were the future, that communism would bury capitalism, and that the Soviet model would dominate. For 45 years, they competed with America, matched us militarily, built more tanks, more missiles, and more troops. But beneath the surface, the economy was dying. Stage 1. Military overextension. The Soviet Union spent 15 to 20% of GDP on the military, which is triple what America spent. They had to match American technology, American reach, and American alliances, but their economy was a fraction of the size. They were in Afghanistan, propping up Cuba, supporting Syria, Vietnam, North Korea, Angola, and Ethiopia. Everywhere America had influence, they had to counter, and the cost was unsustainable. Stage 2 was economic stagnation. The Soviet economy stopped growing in the 1970s. Oil revenue kept them afloat, but nothing else worked. Factories produced junk, farms failed, and technology fell decades behind. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was importing grain. A country with some of the best farmland on earth couldn't feed itself. Because central planning doesn't work, innovation dies under control, and no one produces when there's no incentive. Stage 3, currency collapse. The ruble was never a real currency and couldn't be exchanged internationally. Even Soviet citizens didn't trust it and used dollars when they could get them. The government had to buy foreign goods with gold and oil because nobody wanted rubles. By 1985, when oil prices dropped, Soviet gold reserves were depleting, and they were running out of real money. Stage 4, loss of empire. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell and Eastern Europe left. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and East Germany were gone in a year. The satellites that gave the Soviet Union strategic depth vanished, and the Soviet government couldn't stop it because they were broke. Stage 5, complete collapse. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist, just 900 days from the fall of the Berlin Wall to complete dissolution. No war, no invasion, just economic implosion. The military couldn't be paid, the government couldn't function, and the ruble became worthless. A superpower with 30,000 nuclear weapons collapsed from internal economic failure. The pattern played out again. Overextension, currency failure, debt, loss of empire, collapse. And here's what should keep you awake at night. The United States is following the exact same pattern, stage by stage. Let me show you. Stage 1, military overextension. The United States has over 750 military bases in 80 countries, and we have troops in 150 countries. We're committed to defending Europe through NATO, defending Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, fighting in the Middle East, countering China, and countering Russia. Our military budget is $850 billion annually, more than the next 10 countries combined, and it's not enough. We're stretched thin, equipment is aging, recruitment is down, and we have commitments we can't fulfill. If China invades Taiwan, if Russia pushes into NATO territory, and if Iran closes the Persian Gulf, we can't respond to all of it simultaneously. We are overextended just like Spain, just like Britain, and just like the USSR. Check. Stage 2, currency debasement. In 1971, Nixon closed the gold window and the dollar became pure fiat currency. Since 2000, the money supply has increased 400%. Since 2020, we've printed over $6 trillion. The dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1971. We're not mixing copper into silver coins like the Spanish. We're just printing unlimited paper. The mechanism is different, but the result is the same. Debasement. Check. Stage 3, debt spiral. The United States owes $36 trillion, which is 120% of GDP. Interest payments alone are approaching $1 trillion per year. We are now spending more on interest than on defense. We run deficits every year, $1.8 trillion in 2024, in a growing economy during peacetime. We borrow to pay interest on previous borrowing, which is the exact definition of a debt spiral. Spain defaulted 4 times, Britain borrowed until it collapsed, and the USSR ran out of money. We are on the same path, check. Stage 4, loss of productive capacity. America doesn't make things anymore. We design, we finance, and we consume, but we don't produce. Our manufacturing base has been gutted, shipped to China, Mexico, and Vietnam. We import $800 billion more than we export annually. We are dependent on foreign supply chains for everything: medicine, electronics, steel, and even military components. Just like Spain became dependent on imports while the silver flowed out, we are dependent on imports while dollars flood out. Just like Spain, when the money stops flowing, we are in trouble. We are now spending more on interest than on defense. Stage 5, social decay. Trust in institutions is at all-time lows. Crime is rising, homelessness is exploding, and drug overdoses kill 100,000 Americans annually. The best and brightest are leaving or checking out. Fertility rates are collapsing. And political dysfunction is total. We can't agree on anything, can't fix anything, and can't build anything. The signs of decay are everywhere, but everyone pretends it's fine. It's not fine. Check. We are on stage 5 of 7. The Soviet Union made it to stage 5 before complete collapse. Britain and Spain lasted longer, but the pattern is the same. We are not at the end yet, but we are deep into the sequence. Stage 6 is loss of reserve currency status. That is when allies start diversifying, when trade moves to other currencies, and when the dollar comes flooding back home because no one needs to hold it anymore. We are seeing early signs. BRICS nations developing alternatives. Central banks buying gold, China and Russia trading in yuan and rubles, and Saudi Arabia accepting yuan for oil. The cracks are forming. Stage 7 is collapse, not gradual decline, but sudden implosion. The Soviet Union went from superpower to non-existent in 900 days. Britain lost the empire in 20 years. Spain took longer, but the result was the same. When the reserve currency fails, when the debt becomes impossible, and when the military can't be funded, it doesn't decline gracefully, it collapses quickly and brutally. And everyone who thought it couldn't happen here learns the same lesson every empire learns. It can, and it does. 3 empires followed this pattern: Spain, Britain, and the USSR. Each believed they were exceptional, each believed they were different, and each believed the rules didn't apply to them, but they were wrong every single time. We are telling ourselves the same lies right now. We're different. We have technology, we have the dollar, we're America. But the pattern doesn't care about exceptionalism. The pattern is mathematical. You cannot spend beyond your means forever. You cannot maintain an empire without productive capacity. You cannot debase your currency without consequences. And you cannot avoid stage 6 and 7 once you've completed 1 through 5. The sequence is locked in. The only question is timing. Maybe we have 10 years, maybe 5, maybe less. But the pattern says collapse is coming, and when it comes, it won't be slow. It will be sudden. A currency crisis that triggers a debt crisis that triggers a political crisis overnight. The superpower becomes a cautionary tale. The reserve currency becomes a regional currency, and the empire becomes a memory. 3 times it happened before, and the pattern says we're next. Since 2020, we've accelerated every stage, printed more money, increased more debt, extended military commitments, hollowed out production, and fractured society. We're not walking the path anymore. We're sprinting down it, and the end is visible if you know the pattern. Maybe we'll find a way out. Maybe America can do what Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union couldn't. Maybe we'll reform, rebuild, and restore. And maybe this time really is different. But the pattern says otherwise, the math says otherwise, and history, which has watched empires die the same way over and over, says we're about to learn the lesson the hard way. If this opened your eyes to where we actually are in the sequence, subscribe